with the landfill and the nuclear waste site. Harvey Ferdman, policy analyst with for Representative Bill Otto. Harvey, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
And Dawn Chapman, you've sort of become the community leader in all this, correct?
Right, myself and a couple other moms.
Right, and you guys are on the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Intergoogles and all that, sort of helping spread the word.
That's right, whatever's free.
Okay, good. Harvey, explain to us, what does this front page story mean from the Post-Dispatch? EPA agrees to test soil at complex in Bridgeton. What does that mean?
Well, Dawn and her group were very concerned about the ball fields and the number of children that play in those ball fields and
Right.
the proximity to the landfill. So, Dawn, you want to explain what you guys did?
Right, for the better part of 7 or 8 months, people have been asking us. We've taken up a collection just in a pickle jar to test for soil, and they've wanted those ball fields tested. So we tested it once and ran it through a Gamma Pal machine that had been donated to us by a law firm, and we saw an unusual spike. And then from that point, we handed it over to EPA, reported the spike, and then hired a technician to come out and take more soil samples, and then actually hired a lab to run those soil samples. And the results came back and showed that we had that unusual spike ended up to be elevated level of lead-210, and we had several samples that came back above background.
Okay. Now, first off, let's explain this correctly. The people of Bridgeton, with their own money, raised money for this soil to be tested.
Yes.
Okay. How much money did you guys raise?
Goodness, I think all total this will end up costing us about $3,000.
Okay. Now, there's all sorts of natural spikes in grass and dirt and everything else, Harvey. What does this mean, finding this elevated lead in this ball field? Is it natural? Is it not natural? Is it higher than normal? Put it
higher,
into perspective for us.
Yeah, it's higher than background. It may or may not be high enough to merit remediation or cleanup, but it is higher than background. It's higher than you would expect to see.
But it's lead. We haven't talked about lead before.
Yeah, without getting too technical, the whole uranium decays into all different radioactive isotopes, they're called, and all the way down the chain, you get different isotopes. One of them is lead-210. Lead-210 is typically indicative that there has been radium around, and radium is one of the primary things that EPA has been testing for around the landfill and out at Laddie Avenue and in North County. Lead-210 is a marker that says there's radium around, and this is a key issue for what's happening with the EPA testing. Some of the radium does not give out what's called a gamma rays, if you would, or gamma rays. And so they look for, and gamma rays are the easiest to detect. So they look for other byproducts or other daughter products, they're called. And lead-210 is one of them. So if they see lead-210, they know that there had to be radium there somewhere along the line, because at one point that uranium turned into radium and then turned into lead-210 as it gave off its radioactive stuff.
So concerned are people that they canceled a baseball tournament on these fields.
Right.
And they moved them out of Bridgeton, right?
Right. I spoke with that team.
How many games were moved off of that field?
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, it was a big tournament.
That
right?
was a 70-team tournament, was my understanding.
Right. And I talked to a couple of coaches, and I talked to a couple of parents involved, and the coaches wanted answers, the players wanted answers, the parents wanted answers, and it seemed like this might have been the breakthrough to get people really concerned about, hey, wait a minute, I don't live in Bridgeton, but this is affecting me and my family. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Harvey, so we understand this. They're saying that things like this happen naturally. Are the readings higher than natural lead occurring in places?
That appears, that's the opinion of the lab.
That's the opinion of the tests that the Bridgeton people did on their own with their own money.
Yes.
Now the EPA says, oh, now it's time for us to check because you guys have already done all the legwork. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. You forwarded me a report from the U.S. Geological Survey. What is this report you wanted me to ask you about?
Okay. A while back, a professor at Washington University, Dr. Chris, who's a internationally recognized, peer-reviewed hydrogeologist, and he also runs the radioactive isotope lab there. But he knows all about the groundwater in Missouri. He is the preeminent expert on groundwater in Missouri. He challenged the EPA's studies of what's going on at the landfill. And once again, I have to remind everybody that these studies were not done by government scientists. These studies were done by contractors to the people who were responsible for this mess in the first place and for all that being illegally dumped.
So these are the people that the companies hired to tell them what's going on.
Yes, and
Okay.
the EPA, that's the way Superfund works. Superfund is broken as far as this site is concerned. So under Superfund, it's the perpetrators experts who are out there doing this work and turning in these studies. And so far, every time that an independent set of scientists, and in this case, this is now the second set of independent government scientists who have looked at this from outside the EPA, and they look at any of this data, they come back and say the conclusions that the EPA has accepted are not valid conclusions. You cannot draw these conclusions from these studies and this data. And this report is from the United States Geological Survey, talking about the groundwater in response to Dr. Chris's concerns and challenging. Dr. Chris had challenged the EPA's process and the contractor's studies. EPA said, "Well, we'll get around to commenting on it on our good time." And just yesterday, they released it to Senator Blunt's office. We had been requesting this from EPA and through our senators' offices, and they finally released it. This is dated November 25th, 2013. This study is 6 months old. They've had this data for 6 months from the USGS, and it contradicts the perpetrators' contractors' conclusions, which goes to when Dr. Brooks from the EPA says it's all contained on site, there's nothing to be worried about. He's making those statements based on these studies that are done by the perpetrators' contractors.
Okay, so convoluted, and I think it's purposely convoluted.
Sorry, but
No.
yeah.
It's convoluted purposely so you can't see where the shell is inside the hat. Republic does a survey. The survey comes back, everything's fine. Tells the EPA. Then this independent scientist from Washington University looks at those studies and says, hey, wait a minute. That is an incorrect conclusion to the data you are showing us.
Yes.
Sends this to the EPA in November.
Well, in March 2013, he sent it.
In March in 2013. So for almost a full year they've had it? For over a year?
They've had his report for a year, and then in November they had the response to his report from the U.S. Geological Survey.
Which is an independent review of his data.
Which is an independent review of his data and of the the perpetrators' contractors' data.
Right.
And they have come back and said you cannot draw the conclusions that the EPA has accepted from this data.
So what does this Washington University scientist say is going on with the groundwater?
Well, he's a little hard to reach right now because he's in China.
Uh-huh.
He is world recognized.
Right.
What does he say is going on? He says it merits further study. He goes in, he just simply challenges their data and says you can't draw these conclusions. You must do more studies. He's a scientist. He's factual based, and that's all this community has ever asked for. Is we want good, objective science performed here. And EPA Superfund continues to show us that as long as you're relying on the perpetrators' contractors, there's a problem.
So now you're living in this town that you've raised money to find out that there's elevated lead in these ball fields. The EPA has now gotten a report back from an independent scientist saying more work needs to be done. What is the next step here for this debacle?
Ask Dr. Brooks. No, the next step hopefully is I would like to see our congressional delegation continue in their quest to have this properly addressed by the right federal agency, which would be to move it over to the program that's designed to handle this waste, which is the FUSRAP program, which is the labors performed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
And it is
out of
the Manhattan
EPA's
Cleanup Project.
Outside of the EPA's purvey.
Yeah, take it away from Superfund. Superfund, by law, has to use these the perpetrator's contractors. Now, Superfund has the option of going to outside sources for opinions,
Right.
and they're doing that on the barrier construction. They are going to the Corps of Engineers for their opinion on the barrier construction. But there's still a question of transparency. What happens if the Corps of Engineers comes back and says, we disagree with just like USGS has and others, government scientists have, if they come back and say, we disagree with some of the plans, is that going to be transparent to this community, or are they going to wait 6 months? The EPA had this since November 25th, 2013, and only released it yesterday under pressure from our senators.
Wow. How long will it take EPA to test the soil at the baseball fields?
That's a real good question. There's 2 levels of testing that happen. The first one is a gamma scan, which you can read immediately and get a quick indication, and then you bring that to a lab, and that can take 3 days to a couple of weeks. But during that process, the ideal is to test for alpha and beta, and those are the ones that we're really concerned about. Those are the more dangerous ones if you ingest them or if you breathe them in. They're the ones that we believe are predominant from looking at all the data, that those are the ones that are predominant in this waste. So we want to make sure that they do the more complicated, lengthy tests and make sure there's no alpha and beta emitters that shouldn't be there.
So you're saying within a couple weeks we should have answers?
It's going
Elevated.
No, and that's radioactive lead too. So that is radioactive.
That's Harvey Ferdman, who is a representative for Bill Otto, and Dawn Chapman, community leader in Bridgeton. Website for people to find more information, Dawn.
Yeah, stlradwastelegacy.com. And we have a meeting on May 15th, this coming Thursday, at the International Operating Union Hall off of Hollenberg.
And the Facebook page is what?
Is Westlake Landfill.
Westlake Landfill on Facebook. Harvey and Dawn,
and a panel this evening.
Yeah, there's a panel discussion this evening at Indian Trails Library.
Can we find out more on that Facebook page?
Yes.
Westlake Landfill. Go to Facebook, Westlake Landfill. Harvey and Dawn, thanks for coming in. 8:35, KTR.